Let's give it a college try here. 50 Shades of Grey needs to be studied as a cultural phenomenon. It changed my view on something important. Absolutism is the lowest form of cognitive thinking. I say this frequently. Approaching nearly any topic as something that has to be one way or another doesn't account for nuance, variables, or the fact that nearly nothing is actually just one or the other. Today we're diving into one of the biggest literary phenomenons of the 21st century, 50 Shades of Grey. No, don't laugh. I'm being serious. But this isn't another hot take or some stupid meta-analysis on the sex scenes. It's about something deeper. One of the few things I was an absolutist about. Let's discuss author's intent versus the audience interpretation. As a future author, I had a somewhat radical opinion. The audience interpretation of something was nearly irrelevant to me. I didn't care what you think the author wrote. I believed what the author had intended was the final say on the conversation. A way to have closure on what will always be a subjective argument, or in crayonading terms, someone's personal opinion. My opinion is that you needed a final say. Someone that says, I am the creator, it's my call. Regardless if I wrote the dog is red, the dog could also be blue. 50 Shades of Grey shattered this for me. I used to say, whatever the author said goes. Then I read 50 Shades of Grey and realized I couldn't stay in this camp anymore. Because while E.L. James calls it pure fantasy romance, the story itself hands us a powerful warning about trauma, the bottomless pit of desire of extreme BDSM, and the redemptive power of a healer, more normalized love. Let's explore why the tension matters, and why it might just make her one of the most unintentionally insightful writers. First, credit where it's due. E.L. James has an incredible consistency over her decade. In 2012 BBC interview, she said, and I quote, I think of 50 Shades as being a romance with a kink. Romance in her thing with a kink. She called the whole trilogy her midlife crisis with a large but ultimately all her fantasies in there. In 2022, she doubled down. 50 Shades isn't a BDSM story, she said, nor about the BDSM community. It's about two people. She wrote it as a Twilight fanfic turned into erotic escapism. After reading arousing BDSM material, her goal? A love story where an innocent woman heals a damaged, dominant man through sheer emotional power. No moral ceremony, no takedown of the lifestyle, just fantasy fulfillment. And she stuck to the story brilliantly. No waffling, no retcons. As an inspiring author, I respect the hell out of the consistency. She owned her intent and never pandered. However, she has tremendously benefited from supporting the degeneracy of her writing, regardless of the fact that the full story doesn't actually support her full conclusion on the writing. Here's where things get fascinating. The books themselves tell a different story if you pay attention. Christian Grey's extreme dominance, control, and the Red Room of Pain aren't presented as a healthy kink. They explicitly tie to horrific childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, a drug addict mother who died when he was 4, and then further damage from being groomed by Elena at 15. The narrative frames that lifestyle as compulsive, coping mechanism, dark, isolating, and unsustainable for real intimacy. Anna Steele walks into the room the good woman, the innocent catalyst. Through her love, boundaries, and refusal to stay in a toxic dynamic, Christian confronts his past. The hardcore punitive elements fade. They marry, have kids, and build something closer to a committed mutual partnership. The ending doesn't stay in the deepest pits of BDSM forever. If anything, it avoids most of it. It's redemption through normalized monogamy, family, and emotional safety. As a reader who values healthy monogamy, this hit me hard. It felt like the story was quietly glorifying the recovery from the bottomless pit of trauma-driven sexual extremes. The author, James, may not have intended a cautionary tale, but the text slipped and fell right into one. And that's the beauty of great, or even massively popular, fiction. It can reveal truths the author never set out to preach. Now, fellas, let me talk to you man to man for a second. As a guy, I get why a lot of guys avoided this 50 Shades of Grey. Of course, the billionaire gets the girl and gets away with all this controlling crap. But that's actually missing the point of the story. Let's look closer. This is actually one of the rare stories where a deeply traumatized man, broken, monstrous on the outside, carrying wounds most guys never get the chance to talk about, gets saved by a loving, caring woman who sets boundaries, not to control him or to break who he is, but because she generally loves and respects the good man. She sees buried beneath all the damage. Anna doesn't stay for the money, the jets, or the lifestyle. If anything, she proves the propaganda false. She draws a line, she's willing to walk away, and she forces the hard conversation, digs into the trauma, and helps him heal, risking that future, the money, by refusing to let the darkness win, making the story just as much about him as her. She was willing to step out of the light and support him when he needed it most. That's the traditionally masculine dream most of us actually want. A woman who loves us, loves you through, to stand by you, support you, value you, and fight for the best version of you in her own quiet way. It's powerful. Real love isn't about resources or status. It's about two people choosing each other even when it's messy, even when it hurts, and building something stable together. Christian doesn't get away with it because he's rich. He earns the healthy ending because he finally lets himself be loved. And that, brothers, is why the story hits different when you stop dismissing it as women's smut. It's proof even the most broken man can find redemption if the right woman shows up and says, I see you, and I'm not going anywhere until you see yourself. Now, if it was just about my opinion, I don't think I would have made this video. However, psychology is on my side. It proves that even when the author's intent didn't intend to point out evil, it called it so brilliantly. This also shows why it's not just my opinion, or if it's just, I finally disagreed with an author, guys. But the science says otherwise. Research on trauma and attachment shows why this arc resonates so deeply. First, studies do find associations between certain childhood adversities and BDSM interests. One 2020 survey of 771 participants found higher rates of physical and emotional abuse, authoritarian parenting, and unequal family power dynamics compared to non-practitioners. Another studies linked childhood abuse to sadomasochism tendencies in adulthood. Most studies show BDSM practices are psychologically unhealthy overall, with little to no long-term relationship satisfaction. Though since the trauma is broad, there's no blanket single trauma cause that we can blindly assign to it. The pattern exists for some. Early wounds can shape how we see control, intensity, pain, and intimate spaces. That's exactly Christian's arc. His pit isn't generic kink, it's trauma reenactment. Psychology calls this repetition compulsion, or using sexual dynamics to process or avoid unresolved pain. Regardless if it was James' intent, the psychology seems pretty clear. Now, the redemption part. Secure attachment and unhealthy love can interrupt this cycle. Trauma literature emphasizes that safe, responsible relationship help rewire attachment styles from ancient or avoidant towards security. Romance novels often dramatize this beautifully. Redemption arcs in fiction mirror real dramatic processes. The good partner provides the consistency and boundaries the trauma person never had. In 50 Shades of Grey, Anna becomes the secure base to a more normalized family life at the end. Thus, the story shows that when healing looks like moving out of the rabbit hole into something sustainable. E.L. James didn't set out to write a psychology textbook, but she accidentally nailed a profound truth. Some patterns rooted in exploitation and trauma are hard to sustain. Healthy long-term without major change. And that's why so many readers, myself included, walk away glorifying the recovery, not the red room. So where does this leave us in author intent? I've evolved. Roland Barthes' Death of the Author's idea says that once the book is out, the author's intent does not get the final say. Readers co-create meaning. James intended fantasy romance. We respect that and celebrate how the text slipped into something richer. As a future author, this is my takeaway. Write what moves you. Stick to the story like James did, but trust that readers might find deeper layers, especially around trauma and healing. Don't police every interpretation. Don't be afraid to point out when the story itself says something powerful. To E.L. James, thank you. Whether you meant it or not, you gave us a blockbuster that accidentally glorified climbing out of the darkest pits into healthier love. That's when art does what art does best. Evolve, interpret, and say without always saying. If you're a reader, creator, or just love messing with literary debates, drop your take in the comments. Do you side with the author's intent? Or has a book ever revealed a truth writers never planned? If you want more writing redemption arcs, trauma-informed storytelling, or my own script in progress, hit subscribe and let me know. Thanks for watching. Now go do something that accidentally changes someone. Back to the realms.